Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Good. My name is Brian McKeiver. I am co-owner and solution architect at BizStream. We are a custom software development shop located in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So I believe I win the prize for farthest traveling speaker. And if you hear of anybody else who's traveled farther than Michigan, let me know, because it'll be kind of a funny thing. And I want to tell the organizers that to make sure they know how much this meant to them. So get me all the way down from Michigan. However, that's actually really easy to do when you live in Michigan. If anyone ever says, hey, do you want to go to Florida? You go, yeah, I do. I do. Although, actually, when I left my house, it was 90 degrees up there. So that's pretty rare at this time of year. Global warming, who knows? Let's start this. But my talk today is going to be on the Azure Bot Framework. Just curious, anyone in the room using the Azure Bot Framework yet? Okay, we've got one. That's good. The majority of you aren't. Hopefully you will learn a couple things today. It's kind of a big topic. There's lots that you can do with it. And I'm going to focus in on a few areas to make it specific to actually the bot framework and Lewis, which is a language understanding intelligence service as part of the Microsoft Cognitive API stack of technologies. But again, there's a lot more you can do with it. We're going to try to hone in on some certain areas. I've got some code to show you today. I've got some concepts to describe. So there's a lot to go through. But at the end of the day, it's a presentation for you guys. So if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me, stop me, just get going on them, and we'll try to answer them as best we can. And of course, I'll try to save a couple minutes for questions at the end. But why are we here? You know, what are our goals for this afternoon's or this morning's talk? Sorry, haven't had quite enough coffee. First, I'm going to explain what the Azure Bot Framework is, and we're going to talk about a little bit of the history. I've been using this technology for maybe 18 months, and it's come a long way since version 1, 2, 3, 4, especially with version 4, but I'll get into that. I'll tell you how you can use it and what you're going to do with it. Second, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about making the bots smart. So in a way, you could have created chatbots back in the 90s if you wanted to. If you wanted to use if, else, then statements and reply to SMS messaging, which I actually did back in the 90s. But it was a very dumb activity, and if anyone didn't type the exact right key or the exact right sentence, it became error-prone and frustrating for users. So one of the benefits of using Lewis is the fact that these bots become smart, and they can understand intent of what the user wants to do, and that's going to make a much better experience at the end of the day with using automated services like chatbots. Anyone ever been frustrated by calling into a support line or an online chatbot and it just doesn't understand you? Yes, Lewis is our friend. Lewis will help us avoid that. Of course, it's still some programming work. It's not a magic bullet, but it's a pretty cool system. And then lastly, we're going to put it into real-world action. My company builds websites for people across the country that are heavy lifting websites. They have deep integrations. Most of them rely around e-commerce, taking orders on the web and making sure that the website shoots it down to SAP or Oracle or big ERPs out there. So I thought, why not actually use a real-world scenario that one of my customers even kind of asked me to do. They didn't want to pay for it, but it was a good idea in my head, so I thought that would be a great way to put these concepts into action. So we'll go through that. But those are the three things I'm going to try to teach you guys a little bit about today. So first one, the Azure Bot Framework. Actually, it's a lot like serverless computing in terms of you're putting your code up to a spot in Azure, and the beauty of the bot framework is that it's a set of SDKs, templates, getting started guide, and web service channels and endpoints that are already created that you push pretty much your core code into, and then you get to leverage all of the different capabilities that the framework offers, and you're not starting from brand new project with nothing in it. It basically sets up all the interactions that you need to basically make a bot that can talk on something like Slack or Skype. And that's one of the big values. One of the real reasons I first got into it is because I didn't really want to have to figure it out all on my own. And there are many technologies out there you can build chatbots with out there. But really, I think this one does a great job of saving you time for the things that don't matter to really focus on your application tier and your business logic that you need to accomplish. So I think it's a great set of add-ons, and actually it's fairly inexpensive, so why not give it a shot? But the idea is, your code's in the middle, and like I said, you have all these services that are other web services that are things like Lewis that you can add into it and then push to many channels, writing it once. And we'll talk about how you do that in a second. But as a whole, it's just an SDK that uses web services that are powered in Azure. That's the minimal version of it. And to do this, in the first 3 versions of the bot framework, you're going to use CSharp or you're going to use Node. Those are the 2 main choices, but that covers a lot of people, right? Anyone use Node in the room? Sorry, I don't like Node. I just don't. I'm a C# guy. I've been using .NET for a long, long time, so I'm not going to talk about Node today, but the concepts are the same. If you're a Node person, I think you could figure it out. The templates are there. The starting points are all there. We're going to focus on the C# side. C# developers in the room? Okay, yeah, pretty much everybody else. Good. And again, the first one we're going to talk about is the language understanding bot template. There are other ones that you can do things like, worry about Bing. I don't ever use Bing, so I don't really care about it a whole lot. That wasn't very interesting to me. The text analytics API is also very interesting because you can understand sentiment of human text and things like that. And the Q&A maker is question and answer. That's a quick one if you do want to get, that's the easiest starting point. There's a set of questions, a set of answers, and you don't have to write much code at all. It just kind of puts it all together for you. But to me, the language understanding one is the one that is the most interesting because, again, it's not a dumb bot. It becomes a smart bot. And one of the other values of the platform is that this is actually a screenshot of the bot we're going to go over. I've got it deployed to Skype, Slack, and web. Web means it's just an iframe that you can embed anywhere you want or run in the portal. But notice that we have other channels that we could do, Facebook Messenger, Skype for Business, Twilio. That stuff's all just button clicks to enable. And then suddenly your bot can work on all these different channels. Again, I think that's a huge value of what the bot framework brings. And it makes sense to me that we only have to write our code once and not have to worry about all the presentation layers that it goes into. That's, it's what you should do these days. You shouldn't have to write multiple code. Now, it's funny. This is the promise that Microsoft gives you. Does anyone ever really trust Microsoft's statement 100%? Yeah. The fine details will tell you that, hey, this channel, if you want it to look perfect in Twilio, you can't do it fully automatic. You have to add this little layer of code into it. Or Slack, you want the buttons to look exactly like the rich Slack buttons. Well, that takes a little bit more work. So the fine, last 5% of polish to the actual cards and activities that the users see from your bot, it does take a little bit of work per channel, but 90 to 95% of it you're writing one time. So I don't want to fool anyone that will think that it will look perfect in every channel without a little bit more work per channel. It's a lot like Xamarin in my eyes for, if you want to write C# code that runs in all the different stacks, you're always working a little bit on the UI in iOS. So anyone ever use Xamarin in the room? Yeah, a couple of people will say. So similar things. Still pretty cool. And what I mean by that, and I thought this projector might be a little bit bigger, but here are the 3 examples of the channels. Again, it's the same conversation. First column is Slack, second is Skype, and the third is web. So you can see they're all pretty similar, and we'll get into how to make it all, but at the end of the day, it's still a little bit channel specific, but the main conversation is there. So I've given this talk 2 times before, full disclosure. I was excited because I felt it was polished, it was ready to go, my demos worked, I nailed the code, and then there's this little thing called Microsoft Build that happens every year. And that's in the very end of May, maybe even beginning of June, I can't quite remember the exact date. So I was getting ready for the talk today, doing some work ahead of time a couple months ago, and all of a sudden, there's this gigantic thing that happened, and they dropped a bombshell on me. They launched version 4 of the framework. After going through versions 1, 2, 3, 3.2, 3.3, 3.5, I thought they were kind of settling down and it was becoming a little bit more stable of a platform. But version 4 came out, and that changed the entire story. So in the last 2 weeks, I've put in probably 30 hours to convert all of my code, all of my presentations and everything to version 4. Because at the end of the day, you're coming here, you're spending your time at Code on the Beach, and I don't think it was right to show you something that in a way had become antiquated in the last 2 months. So I did my best to try to give you guys as much value as you could. You're going to learn about version 4 in the whole rest of the talk. I might compare some of the older versions to where we are now with version 4. But at the end of the day, If you were to do this in production, and you started in the Azure portal and you said new bot, you would get version 3 because that's what's the production release. Everything in version 4 is in preview only, but it will be finished in the future. So just be aware that we have to tie both lines, because when you do certain actions in the Azure portal, it's targeted at a version 3 bot. It's a fun thing with Azure. You know, if anyone thinks that Azure never changes, they're probably in the wrong business. It's kind of crazy, but big deal. The key things about the version 4 rewrite is that someone told me it was an upgrade, and they lied to me. They completely redid the architecture. It used to be .NET 4.6 with the ability to do some .NET Core. The new version is completely .NET Core. It changed some of the objects. It changed some of the way you communicate. There used to be these things called dialog forms, which you could have conversations in. Now those are all gone. Everything is a task-based async await pattern in all of the coding that goes into it. So the other thing they did was they added more languages. So like I said before, CSharp and Node. Well, now you can do a few other things, Python, Java. And they're just expanding the platform to bring it to more people. But at the end of the day, it is a more realistic, modern implementation of the bot framework. So I think that's a good thing. I think they made the right choice. I just wish they maybe would have told me before this talk was happening and I didn't notice at the time. But anyways, that's some of the history. So what's important for you guys in the audience in the history is that, like I said, if you were to go right now and follow the exact documentation on Microsoft's website, it would give you kind of the old version 3.5 stuff. So if you want to take what you're going to learn today and do this on your own at home, you have to actually download a v4 template from that URL. And again, I'll make the slides available later, but that would give you the v4 bot template to start with if you're going to use C#. Okay? So it's funny, don't actually use the portal to do something in the portal. Start with Azure first. And as soon as you install that, it should be pretty easy. So instead of continuing to just talk about theory, I thought I would show you some things at this point. We're going to walk through a little bit of, I've taken that, nope, you can't see that yet. I have taken that v4 template that I just showed you the screenshot of, and I've already published it up to our working example. So in Azure, I have a bot running. And if you were to do this yourself, you would start just like anything else as a developer. You pretty much search for web bot, and web app bot is the one you would start with. Because I should be clear, the code implementation of your bot still relies on creating the Azure web app service, right? That sets up your keys, your URLs, your endpoints, and then what you deploy to the spot in Azure, that's the v4 template in code that I'm mentioning. So sorry, just try to be really clear. So you still need to do this step, but don't just then download the code that this gives you out of the box. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. So, you would name it. You pick your location, your resource group. It's funny, they default to the paid version of the framework, and they make it very, very clear as to what is the free version that costs $0, right? That is the F0 pricing tier. So do not get fooled and actually try to pay for the premium version of this if you're playing around with it. F0 is the free tier. Start with that. It's going to give you a lot of ability. In fact, I don't think I can figure out a business case to where you actually need to pay for this. But that's Microsoft for you. They always want you to pay for something. And then, of course, like we were saying before, here are the starter templates that you would get. C# or Node is the selection right now. This starts up the code. Pretty much you would throw it away if you want to use version 4. And then you would provision it. And that would get you back to where we are here. So that's all I did, right? Click through, step, create, provision. And then normally you would come to the build tab and you either download the source code that you had just provisioned, or if you're crazy and you want to edit your code inside of a web browser, I don't know why you would do that, but you could open it in the online code editor and you can actually work on it right then and there. But more importantly, this is actually where you configure continuous deployment. and we'll get into that in a second. So you can actually edit your code, commit to your GitHub repo or TFS Online or whatever they call it these days, and everything would get deployed automatically. Very easy to do, very simple. Okay, that's the place that you would start to create the service. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the code. Okay. All right, that actually worked. But before we talk about the code, there's maybe a little concept to figure out, and that is Lewis. So as I said, this is the smartness of the bot. It's the natural understanding service, natural language understanding service. It's part of the cognitive services stack from Microsoft, and it's available at lewis.ai. What's interesting is, as the platform and the framework has matured, when you click provision or create in the Azure portal, it actually takes your bot and automatically inserts it into the lewis.ai bot management area and connects the services up for when you select the Lewis bot template. In version 1 and 2, it didn't do any of that, and the setup was way more complicated, and you actually had to log in here, create another app, figure out your keys, bring your keys back to the Azure bot service, and it was just this disaster of a nightmare. Luckily, that's all seamless now. You click a button, it sets this up. But you will still need to manage the way you handle the language processing in Lewis, which is why I want to go over this. And has anyone ever used anything like building an Alexa skill or Lewis or other voice processing? Okay, we've got a couple heads shaking, but most of the people are saying no. When you do that as a computer, what you're trying to do is understand the language, and you as the developer, you have to kind of help the machine figure it out. So if you take a few sentences, which are called utterances in both Microsoft World and Amazon World, book me a flight to Cairo, order me 2 pizzas, that basically, by these services, gets automatically translated into a nice JSON result. And it comes back to you in a web service. It comes back as an endpoint return. And it tells you that if I utter the sentence as a human or type it in, book me a flight to Cairo, I'm going to try to figure out what your intent is. And right now I figured out that book flight is the intent that we have set up inside of Lewis, and that the entities or the variables of where I want to go on that flight, Cairo, that's going to come back further below. And we're going to get to that in a second. But the idea is, of these 4 things, you preset up ahead in Lewis your intents that you know that you're trying to serve in e-commerce. We'll get into what my intents are. But this one, again, it's either we're booking a flight or we're ordering pizza. That's what we're trying to do by saying that statement. And Lewis from Microsoft is going to return it to you in a nice JSON representation. So you don't have to figure it out. You don't have to worry if they did a typo. You don't have to worry about if they put apostrophes for pluralization or singular. Pretty much that's the magic that makes it a little bit more tolerable to understand. And it actually does a heck of a good job. I'm actually impressed how well this technology works. So in Lewis, you set up your intents. That's what you then map into the code of the bot framework. So we have now 2 web services. We're using the Azure Bot Framework web service. We have the Lewis web services. Those 2 things are communicating back and forth. And at the end of the day, it's routing it and returning it. And you're in control of saying, if I have 3 intents or 2 intents here, I better have 2 or 3 intents in my code to handle that. That's kind of the magic of mapping it, whether I'm booking a flight or I'm ordering pizza. That's the map into our code. And then as part of the utterance, or what I'm saying as the user, we, inside of the Lewis app, map entities, which are our variables. And in the Alexa world, it's called slots. But basically, we say that I'd like to check my order history in the e-commerce sense for this email address and the zip code of 49534, which is my home zip code. Sorry, I have no idea what the zip codes are here. No clue. I'm from Michigan, remember. Basically, here is where you're trying to interpret and help your code, because if someone gives you a lot of information without naturally typing, this system can return it to us, and now we don't have to ask for that later down the road. So it's a way to put variables into the processing and the understanding of the human speech. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like inside of Lewis, instead of just having me talk about it. And hopefully this lets me log in, because last time I had some issues with it, because I have like 3 Microsoft accounts. It's also a disaster. Thank you. Any day now. There we go. All right. So the one we're going to use is actually this one. You can have multiple apps inside of Lewis. Usually it's 1 app per thing you're trying to do, or 1 project. Here I have a couple intents, and let me zoom in for the people in the back, because it might be small. Oops, maybe not that big. So this won't come out of the box. This is something you do have to set up. You do have to figure out what your bot is going to do. So you're going to have to make these intents. But it does kind of walk you through how to make them. Basically, I'm going to go to order history, and it will show you that once I say I want to make an intent, or there's something I want to service as the chatbot, give me 5 or 10 sentences in text of what I should watch out for. So this is a little bit of machine learning going on behind the scenes. The more and more data you give it, the more examples, the more smart it becomes, and the better the intent scoring or the mapping of what you're trying to do happens. So I've given it 10 or so utterances to figure out what we're trying to do. So I can type into the bot, I'd like to check my order history, and that's all. Or I'd like to check my order history from my email address, check order status. All that is trying to basically map the intent. And the neat thing is, if you kind of miss something and hover over it, this application is letting you say, do I want to make this into an entity? And remember, the entity is the variables that are going to come back in the code for us. And do I want to map that word order to an existing entity, or do I want to make a new one? There's a lot of pre-built entities. So things like city, state, address, time, date, you don't have to do any extra work to do that. The Lewis platform gives that to you. Zip code is actually one of them, I think, at this point, and so is email. So I'm just kind of using some of the pre-built ones. And the cool thing is you can start testing right inside of Lewis as well. So, I can say hello world, or spell it even wrong. And it's actually, right now, a very low match. 0.31 is a very low match because I have nothing else that's even close to hello world. That intent score basically is something you can key off in your application to say if it's a very low match, maybe I don't do anything. I say, I don't know what you mean. But if it's a high match, like I'd like to place an order, which it matches one of our utterances very closely, now 0.93 is the special sensitive interpretation of that. Question?
Would that number be higher the more examples you give it? So over time, it'd be able to score more accurately, so hello world would be like 0.01 or something?
Yes. Yep. The more and more you give it, the better the tolerance will become, I guess. And I only have like 6 utterances for a couple of these things. There's a way to import text into this. So I've seen some people like push 1,000 sentences into it. Then it's really, a better way to do it.
Okay.
The more data you have, the better, basically.
Right.
And the less lazy you are, also the better, because I was just typing it manually. But there's the idea of the language processing making sense to everybody a little bit? Okay, cool. All right. So those are our 2 services, right? We're doing the bot framework service, we're doing the Lewis service, and now I want to set up the scenario that kind of brings it together. So, like I said, my company, we build websites for lots of people around the country, and we actually specialize in Kentico CMS. It's a .NET CMS. Anyone heard of it, Kentico? Okay, we got one person, cool. And the example we're going to use today is the starter template site, and here's a little screenshot of it. It's a preview. It's a store template, so you can start up Kentico CMS and say, I'd like to start with an e-commerce template, and this is what you get. And their example is called the Dancing Goat e-commerce store, and it's all about selling coffee. So those are coffee grinders or brewers, and you can buy other coffee. But basically, the site will take orders for you. It'll handle a lot of stuff out of the box. And one of the things that happens is that their CMS has an automatic REST service built into it. So anything that goes into the CMS, you can pull out via a REST service. And it can be JSON, XML, whatever. XML happened to fit this screenshot a little bit better than JSON. But the idea is, as orders happen in that template site, here's the order header. I can click into it to see the details, just like any other e-commerce platform. But the big thing for today's session is that I'm able to pull that out in a very structured way on another web service. We have Azure Bot Framework, we have Lewis, we have Kentico. All web services, you can think of them as microservices running in different places. And we can bring it all together to get our chatbot to actually be smart and talk about e-commerce. So what does that look like? Here is the website running at just a test URL. And again, it's a normal website, right? We've got content, but we also have products. So if I go to the store, I can see, I probably should hit this website at least once before this morning. So it's got to spin up probably for today. We can see that there's products there, they have attributes, but most importantly, we can buy something. And here's some coffee that they're selling, all that kind of good stuff. And if I was to buy this, yeah, I should have totally spun this up. If I was to buy this, there's pricing. I'm just trying to show that this is a normal e-commerce experience. One of the neat things is, as the orders come in, they're all lining up. Into the back end of the CMS. And actually one of the things about Kentico is it's got a pretty sweet back end. It's pretty easy to navigate and get around and use. But there are my orders. So we can see I have an order from May, and the scenario that I want to support in my chatbot is maybe I didn't get all the things in my order. Maybe I want to figure out what's going on with it. So I want to be able to chat about the history of the order. And again, this order has a lot of attributes. What's in the order, all that kind of fun stuff is shown, typical e-commerce stuff. But the important thing is, if I hit a special URL, I can get that data out over JSON. Very ugly JSON, but I can get it. And I don't have to get everything like this. I can actually format just the columns and just the items I want. It can be this is just a quick dump of JSON. I just want to show you that this is where the data is coming from. Okay? So enough about Kentico. At that point, let's talk a little bit about the code of the chatbots. Sorry. So, again, if you remember at the beginning, I said you will go get the v4 template of your Visual Studio project, and that's really small text, so let me fix that. Let me move this over. Okay, so it is a .NET Core 2.0 site in the template. I've upgraded it to .NET Core 2.1 just because that's the latest and greatest these days, just to make sure it also works in .NET Core 2.1, and it totally does. Well, mostly does. I'll get to that at the end. But it's got your typical .NET Core setup. We've got a program, and we have startup. And the big thing is you're going to get all these libraries, all the Microsoft Bot Builder libraries. There's quite a few to kind of just get it going. But you're going to load up a startup just like any other .NET Core 2.1 project. And the key thing is here is we're going to use, in our services registration, the bot object that it's giving us. And the concept of the bot framework is that it's not that much different than any other .NET Core code that you write. You basically have the ability to have a middleware, which is something that's listening to the pipeline as we communicate across all the web services. We can inject and do things into that pipeline because dependency injection is fully supported. That's a nice benefit of the version 4 framework. Version 3, it wasn't as easy. And then at the end of the day, you're kind of running a configuration back to Lewis. So just want to introduce a little bit that it's a standard C# project at this point, and that we'll talk about a little bit more is what do the rest of the objects look like in terms of your dialogue and how you actually format the conversation. So just a quick introduction to it, but we'll definitely come back to this in a second. Okay. Now, as I said, when you start the Azure Bot Framework, you're going to get the code. You could edit it in the window of Azure Portal, and that's what this would look like. But trust me, you don't want to edit it here, right? You want to run it locally, what I just showed you. And to do that, there's this awesome tool called the Bot Framework Emulator. This is the thing that kind of brings it down to your local machine. You basically encapsulate all of the stuff that Azure is doing for you in an emulator. You're able to actually have your chatbot in the middle here of the screen. You open your code file running locally on your machine, and this simulates all the requests and responses that are needed to actually hit Azure or Lewis or Kentico, bring it all together, and gives you a test harness. So this is your friend. This is an absolute thing you need to do. There's two versions of it. The old version, which is the link at the top, which looks like a white screen. This is the version 4 of the Bot Framework Emulator. And if you click this screenshot, it'll actually take you to the download page. But this is where you're going to be working pretty much all day long if you're working on building a bot. One note, that's an alpha release. This is the latest release. There's no future release after this. And it actually took me a long time to figure that out because I had to search and search and search. There's no great documentation. So I try to point out that it is the alpha release. So at this point, let's do it. Let's actually talk to the chatbot and actually see how we can use it in the emulator. Because most importantly, that's where you're going to do your debugging as well. So I am going to actually run this .NET Core 2 app. And what happens is it's going to build and fire up the listening endpoint on your local machine. We're then going to take the Bot Framework Emulator, we're going to connect to our local machine. So here is the .NET Core service running, and it basically says, okay, here it is. Here's the sample. I actually never changed the HTML page, but you will take the sample that's running in your local machine, and then you would paste it into a new endpoint. I've already pasted it in there, so if I click Start, here's the first. It's actually pretty small. You guys see this in the back? Is that big enough, or is it still too? Because I can go bigger. Oh, you guys see it? All right. So I have code running that introduces and welcomes you to the bot. Here it is, and it's basically saying, "What would you like to do today?" And I'm trying to give the user that. Basically, there's 3 services that my chatbot's providing about e-commerce. So the first thing I'd like to say is, I'd like to check on my order history. So this starts the conversation, or in code terms, we've now entered the dialogue between the user and the bot. And each user, every time I join a conversation, I get my own kind of user state with the bot service. So if you want to talk, David, to the bot, and I'm talking at the same time, the platform is intelligent enough to know that there's 2 different conversations going, and it's kind of managing all that because it's basically all asynchronous. And I'm asking for a couple pieces of information in the dialogue. I'm asking for, hey, if you want to check out your order history, tell me who you are. So I'm going to say brian@bizstream.com. And then it's going to say, okay, I recognize the email. Now, just like any other security statement thing should do, it's going to say, hey, are you saying who you're saying you are? What was the billing zip code? That's pretty normal in e-commerce customer help scenario. Give me your billing zip code. I'm going to do my zip code. What's happening, it's going to then reach out to the e-commerce store in Kentico, pull out the data over the REST service, and give me, hey, I found 2 orders in the system. And order 1 was of this information. Here's everything you need to know, and the status is completed or shipped or not shipped. You can do whatever you want. That's up to you. A couple things to note. You'll see that we went from plain text to rich text. This part, each one of these responses in the code is called a card, and all the cards support Markdown. So that's basically just Markdown syntax to do bold, bullet lists, and things like that. So we have the very simplest of basic text. We also have rich text as a card, and then we have images and choices and a few other nice card types that you can kind of richly format the response from the bot. But one of the cool things that the bot emulator does is if you actually click any of the log statements, it gives you behind the scenes what everything was sending to and from all the services. So I actually want to do is I want to go back up to the top, or actually I'll just do it again. I'd like to check my order history. And this time I'm going to say for brian@bizstream.com. This time it got a little smarter, right? It didn't ask me for the email as the very first question because the Lewis service had processed that, great, I see your email address is brian@bizstream. Now I just need one more piece of information from you, just your zip code, right? So we kind of have to set up, is the user typing in that information or are we just automatically figuring out based on what they typed in? And if you look at the response, it should give us that Lewis intent mapping. At least it used to. Maybe it doesn't anymore. No, I'll bypass that for now. But basically, you get the idea, right? If I'm going to type in like this, I actually still think it's going to go. Oh, actually, this is a good point. It asked me for my zip code because the conversation was still going. It's smart enough, and I put in like one regex statement to say, is this a valid zip code that the person answers as the question? And it's saying that, yeah, you got to give it to me as a valid zip code. And honestly, you can also put in things like interrupts. So I put in, anytime someone types cancel or quit, it just stops the conversation as well. So from a user interface, this is the basic first step part. There's a lot more that you can do, but I thought I would start here to make sure this makes sense to everybody. And it looks like it's making sense. All right. So from a code standpoint, I thought we should go through that, right? And actually, we will do it at the first level of the bots. And to prove this whole bot emulator thing works, what I want to do is show you, not this, I want to show you, sorry. I'm in the wrong spot. Where is that? I kind of wanted to show you guys the way that the Lewis result comes back. And the main part of, the main part of the bot framework template is this on-turn context. The context is the conversation thread, really, and everything interacts through the context. And we try to figure out if the conversation update is the brand new conversation, here's the welcome message, or we're using the send activity to push down text into the welcome message. But if it's not a welcome message, we're getting some things about the state that the conversation is right here, and then we're understanding that utterance of where I said cancel. That's the code that's handling basically canceling and then ending all of the context after that. But if it's not a new message, it's not canceling, we are basically using just 4 lines of code to return the result from Lewis, parse the content, and call the correct dialogue. So let's just quick do that one more time. So this time I'm going to do, I'd like to check my order history. And it's going to start out, and it's going to say, oh, we already had a conversation that started. I don't need to send the welcome message. And now I'm going to get things like load up state. It's not interesting, so I'm just going to skip it. I did not utter the word cancel, so I'm going to skip that as well. And now I'm waiting, and then I figured out, okay, Lewis is going to bring a result back. And what the Lewis result gives me, no, that's not scaling very well. Sorry, that's my surface. But order history was the intent of what I typed in, and the score was 0.768. So basically, here, I make sure that I'm checking the Lewis results. Oh, I'm passing the arguments, and then matching the order history intent, which is, again, what I set up at the top with all of my dialogues, which are the conversation. So we have order history, order tracking. I have another intent of trying to find out where my tracking number is, and then I have a place a new order intent, which we're going to get to next. And that then passes the context off to the dialog class. The dialog class, which is here. And the important thing is that the dialog constructor here is where you set up your dialog sets and containers. Here's where you flow the conversation. And these are actually called waterfall steps. Whoa. So if I ask for order lookup, that's where I'm asking for your email. After that, I'm going to ask for the validation info. That's where I'm going to validate your billing address. And after for that, I'm going to call out and return to the information I found from Kentico. So those steps are in order, and those are tasks that are below in the class. And I'm also using 3 types of prompts in this dialog conversation. I'm using the simple text, which is the first one, and then I'm asking for email and zip in separate prompts, because here's where I'm tying the validator at the very end that says email validator and zip code validator to make sure that those things are tied together. So, sorry for my slack there. Now, the first result of order lookup info, I'm actually checking, did Lewis parse out email as the entity? That's where it recognized me as brian@bizstream.com. And if I already have email from the Lewis result, I'm not going to ask the user that question. I'm just going to put it in my state. State is just a dictionary of key value. What values do you want to store about this conversation? So I can use that later. So I'm calling and updating the states. If I don't, in my state, already have the user's email, I'm then going to prompt them for the email. An email prompt is the tie that says, here's the text I want to send to this prompt, because you can reuse prompts for the same set of text. And here's my first critique of the bot framework. You've heard me say all the positives. Here's one of my first negatives. It's very heavily string-based still. It's not all that, I don't love having email prompt in a magic string all over my code. It's at the top, it's at the bottom, and we can make it constants and do things like that, but I wish it was more just like, here's the type or something of that nature as opposed to magic strings. But I think it's because this is so new, they're still working on it. And then from there, we kind of get into the rest of the activity. And there's more. We pass it along to Kentico, we get the order back. Here's where we're generating the markdown. All that kind of good stuff is happening. If you're familiar with Markdown, it's the double stars and the pound sign before the text. We're looping through the orders to find the order item, and then we're building the return SKU name and price that made up the result. Okay? So, does the code at least starting to make sense to everybody? Question?
So I understand right now, based on what you have available, if you wanted to say like, okay, we're going to have one bot in Spanish or one bot in English, could you have the same code base? Does it pass like a locale?
It does. Okay. That's a version 4 improvement that they added culture awareness. And one of my other dialogues, I have culture.english as the type, and that's all, that ability is basically just built in.
Now when that goes to Lewis, are you able to set up in like different languages?
Yep. Lewis has that ability as well too. It's actually really cool that you can do that.
Question for dialogue state. Let's say a user says like, show me the last 5 orders for email address and zip code.
Yep.
Is there a way to have like optional dialogue state? Or like I don't need to know necessarily if you want the top 5, but if you give me top 10, top 20.
Yeah, I mean I think you'd actually set that up as an entity in Lewis, and then your code would have to react to it a little bit. But basically, you'd kind of have to program the optionality into it.
Okay.
But it's doable. Question?
Adding on to the language, do you actually have to define the language it's looking for, or does it like can it actually detect it?
I think you have to define it. I haven't seen anything that like auto detects it. But yeah, good question. Okay, so like many other things, there's bugs with this, but based off time, I'm gonna skip some of these bugs. I basically had a funny story that I renamed the solution right after I built it in Azure the first time, and then the damn thing wouldn't publish over and over and over because there's this hidden file that is in your solution but doesn't show up in Visual Studio. It's your deployment script and your build command basically that gets published. So watch out for that if you're renaming stuff and you don't rename that. Also, I was very frustrated because this is .NET Core 2.1, but some of the templates are in 2.0 still. And I had this code working on 4 different machines. But on my Surface, when I finally brought it here last night, I still get this damn error that I can't get .NET exe to load in IIS Express. So as with anything, sometimes the stupid things can bite my ass. It has issues still. This is preview, it's alpha, it's the newest bleeding edge stuff. But at the end of the day, it's some pretty cool things. And I do want to do a little bit more on another quick demo to show off some of the other capabilities that I have ready for you guys. Because this is, again, a, where's my emulator? This is a pretty cool thing that you can do. So the last intent I want to show is I'd like to place a new order. And I'm going to skip debugging for right now. Oops, I forgot to cancel the last conversation. I'll do that one more time and turn this off. Because it's not just about text, is what I want to show you guys. Actually, I'll screw up the, I'd like to place a new order. Right? I'm a real human, I don't type very well. Darn it. So here, in this intent, what I've done is basically said, all right, we're going to put a chatbot thing on our web page or maybe in social media, and if someone wants to place an order, I'm going to reach out to our product catalog, and in this simple example, I'm pulling the 5 most popular items. We have a category of most popular items. You could do whatever you want here. You could bring in other items or say what kind of thing do you want to buy and interpret that, but this is the quickest version. So I'm going to buy item number 2, which is, I guess, honey. And item number 1, which is maybe a press or a brewer. Actually, I'll just say item number 1. So this is an example of a choice prompt. You can have basically long descriptive text, but behind the scenes it's one value, or you only need the user to pick one thing. And then how many would you like to purchase? I'd like to purchase 3 of these guys. And here we have our first example of a richer card. This is actually called a hero card. And the card can be an image, it can have a title, and it can have actions. So in here, I wasn't ready to build in the whole, give me your credit card number. Now, some people do that. They do the whole thing, in a whole checkout process in the bot framework, and they capture everything. I wasn't going to do all that just for this demo. But basically, I'm not ready to receive payment, but I will allow you to continue to purchase what you just asked for on the website. So I must have already had one thing in my cart, ignore that, from an earlier test. But basically, those are the 3 things I just wanted to buy. And it dumped me right to the e-commerce store. And now I'm able to finish the checkout there. So you can integrate the bots with other things, right? They can just be one part of the process and you can bring it together. But we're basically pulling and pushing data now from our Kentico e-commerce site, all within the bot framework, all by making web requests to REST APIs. That's kind of cool. Question?
If you were to answer in a complete sentence, I'd like to purchase 3, would you be able to extrapolate the number out of it? Or do you really need to answer like just the number?
Oh, you could totally, you could do that,
okay.
Right? If you actually push that, because I'm pushing everything to Lewis and bringing it back. So yes.
So to be able to figure out that you want
it totally would. Okay. Yeah. Another question?
Would you just need to add new words detecting for, like, say, the number in that sentence in that case, or the number right?
Exactly. You would map an entity in the utterance in Lewis, and then it would be able to process that out. Or if you had the entity mapped in other ones, it might just figure it out too. Again, if you give it enough samples of data of utterances, sometimes it gets pretty smart and you don't have to keep mapping it. But yeah. Okay, so there is the example. That rich card is actually pretty cool to put together. You can do things like video in there. You can do other action steps of like continue on to another dialogue. That's just the action step of open new URL, basically, to continue purchase, which is what that is. So I thought I would actually also give you a few more tips to leave with. And one of those tips is there's something brand new from Build as well called Chat Down. All right, Chat Down is basically Markdown for chatbots. So you can define a conversation in a text file. And you basically at the top have the header of what the bot name is, your code, and then the user that you want to interpret the conversation to be with. And you can go through and say, here's the mock-up of the conversation. And this is basically a design tool for you guys as developers. Just like we do mock-ups and wireframes of the web pages that we build, or maybe the diagram of the architecture of the website, here you can go to your business user, you can have the conversation when they say, I'd like to build a chatbot for our company, and you can go, okay, how would you envision the chat working? What do we want to support? You can actually write this file in Markdown statement, and then what happens is you run it through the chatdown npm package, and it generates the JSON representation of all of the conversation, and then you open that in the Bot Framework Emulator, and you will see the chat exactly as it will be. You can step through and see the calls you need to make. So it's a little bit of a design tool to try to help you make this in more of a, because like when I was sitting there trying to figure this out at home, I'm thinking, well, the user might say this or that might say that. Now you can maybe farm this out and you can give screenshots to people without writing any code, right? So I think the chatdown's a pretty cool new tool. They just introduced it. The link is there at the bottom to get to it. And I was pretty surprised that they did something like that. It's pretty cool. Next tool to take home is this is a little cheat sheet. Full disclosure, I did not create this, so I got to credit Steven here, but he did a great job because there is actually so many pages of information about the chatbot framework, it's ridiculous. And finding the right thing, as typical Microsoft documentation goes, is actually pretty tough. So this gives you the categories of if you want to look up the Azure Bot Service, which is the more the Azure specific side of it, if you want to look up the Bot Framework, which is the code-based side of it, here's where to go to get all the things. Because, you know, at the end of the day, there's so much out there, but it's nice to have the right tools. And I thought this was kind of a neat little thing that you could take. And then lastly, what I thought I would show you, because I promised write it once and use it in many channels. I have the same chatbot deployed to our Slack service running at BizStream back home. People are trying to get a hold of me probably, but that's too bad. That's Mark, he's my business partner and a co-owner. But basically, everything we just showed in the emulator, I have running in production, well, running across the web. And you can do the same thing. You know, I'd like to check my order tracking, well, I'll spell it wrong, tracking number. Now, it doesn't usually take this long. So I'm going to blame Slack client for this because I don't know if I've had this open. Okay, cool. Now this is a third intent that I'm just trying to find a tracking number. So actually, I don't know if I should ask for that or not, but we'll do the whole thing again. Just want to give you an example that this can run from different channels. I'm actually surprised it's running this slow. Okay, well, I just did that, but we'll try it one more time. They're not perfect. Remember I said that. All right, terrible demo. It's failing on me. I'm gonna skip it. Just know that I had this working like literally an hour ago. I don't really know why it's not. Okay, so basically, I did want to leave a few more questions and time available for questions. This is another card, hero card, that has all the properties filled in. Hope you guys learned a little bit about Lewis, chatbots, Azure Bot Framework, all the things you can do. But any questions out there from anyone else? Question?
At the bottom of the chat.
That is a great question.
So can you upload images?
You can. That's something that they actually added recently. This is a file upload control, so you can transfer files. Because what Microsoft is doing is they're actually integrating this with MS Teams. Does anybody use MS Teams? I'm sorry, you guys. It sucks. I still use Slack for everything, as you can see. No, basically, they're for enterprise collaboration. If you want to upload a file to MS Teams to automatically go to a SharePoint library, that's where you can do that from. Your code can interpret that and do things with that file if it needs to. So that's why they added this button. It didn't used to work that way. I don't know, but it does now. So yes, you can do things with uploading files. Like maybe you upload a receipt to an expense app in your company. That'd be a cool use for the bot. Second question.
Two questions.
Okay.
One, we had started out talking about hosting on Azure, but is it possible to pull it down and host it on local servers, stuff like that, or is it something that needs to run off?
It is the Azure Bot Framework service. You do need to run it on Azure. I wish you could. if you want it to efficiently connect all of the keys to Lewis, you really need to. I think if you were doing a pure text conversation only, you probably could get away with deploying the web app to an on-premise server and then interacting with the web services a little bit more manually.
Right.
But all of the API toolkit expects you to have like the Azure key secret and connect up to it, or use the emulator. So that's why it's the two main things. But it would take a lot of effort, and I don't know if it'd be worth it to do it on-premise.
And then the second question, you mentioned the web services manually. Is it possible, I noticed that the different connections were like either going through Skype or Teams, Slack, stuff like that.
Yep.
But is it possible to do like a web API or something where you can just have it done headless?
Yep, yep. It actually is pure headless if you want to do it that way. And one of the cool things that they'll give you in the Bot Framework portal for Azure, too many windows. Just like I can pull data from like this from Kentico in the portal. If you go to the overview, here is your messaging endpoint. And if you wanted to pass JSON to and from your messaging endpoint, I don't have it's 405, so I don't have the right stuff in the query string. But yes, you could actually use it as a headless type of solution.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there any security or anything around it for like private bots or anything?
Yes, there is. So I skipped over that, but in both the Azure call or the in the Azure calls or the emulator, you have an application ID and application password that you can optionally add that then basically locks it down to say you must have these two things set up to actually have a secure connection to the bot. So not just anybody can call it. But in development, pretty much you just skip all that, because I actually tried getting it going. It was a complete headache, honestly. And all the examples say, oh, just leave it blank. So I'm leaving it blank because that's what they told me to do. Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone's time today. Oh, freaking the last time it was the very last button that's wrong. Hope you learned a little bit about Bot Framework. There's my contact info if you have any further questions. I will post the slides on my slideshare.net page, and enjoy the rest of the conference.